We're celebrating World Breastfeeding Week, and during these few days, we try to educate new mothers on the benefits of breastfeeding for both mothers and their children. Breastfeeding provides the new babies the essential nutrients and antibodies that they need during the first few weeks and months of their life. Breastfeeding is also immensely beneficial for mothers because it reduces the risk of breast cancer in women. Now, while educating about breastfeeding, women need to be educated on, for instance, how to hold the baby so that it latches on properly to the breast, or for working women, how to express milk so that they can have their babies feed on breast milk while they are away at work. Now, the theme of this year's Breastfeeding Week is to enable working mothers more to have more baby-friendly spaces in offices so that women can carry their children to work at least some days a week, their babies, so that they can breastfeed in secure spaces in the workplace. So while we are celebrating World Breastfeeding Week, we spoke to a specialist doctor who answered some of our questions. So do please listen in. With me, I have Dr. Balamba, who is a senior gynecologist and obstetrician, and we are very glad to have you here today, doctor. Now, my first question is, according to the present statistics of the National Family Health Survey, there has been the largest percentage in the increase of children who were exclusively breastfed under the age of 6 months. This is a very large percentage that has increased in the recent survey. Now, do you think this is enough? Are you happy with this increase, or do you think more can be done about it?
I think we have to do more about it because, as such, what we see in the private setup is much different from what happens in the public setup. In government hospitals, the patients who come to us are all from the below poverty line, mostly or lower middle class. They are all very receptive when we tell them to breastfeed. They do breastfeed, and then, we have no problem. But when you come to a private setup, it's very different and very difficult to convince these women. And we have some facts and about this breastfeeding, because people, in our country think the first 3 days they should not feed the baby because it is colostrum. Actually, what they don't understand is colostrum is very rich in fat. Though it is 2 or 3 drops only, it is very much sufficient for the babies, as well as it carries lots of antibodies against diseases. That many don't understand, and we have to explain to them. And some of the private hospitals now also have what are known as lactation experts, who come and teach them. But in fact, what I personally feel is we have to start this counseling right from the antenatal period, when we examine the breast and tell them how to take care of the breast and the importance of breastfeeding. We do all that. In spite of that, sometimes the mothers are not willing to breastfeed. That is because their attenders tell them, they have lots of misconceptions. So I don't know how to solve this problem, because the attenders also have to be counseled. In the olden days, because I have a lot of experience, I am quite old that way, And in the beginning of my career, the grandmothers used to be very breastfeeding savvy, I should say.
Yes.
And they used to encourage their daughters and daughters-in-law, as well as even their granddaughters also, And they used to encourage them to have a vaginal delivery, feed the baby immediately. And nowadays, the grandmothers don't seem to have that knowledge at all. So there's a lot of difference between then and now. And then again, what happens is in the private hospital, when the babies are weighed, if they lose some weight, the pediatricians will tell them, your baby is losing weight, we better go on to top feed. And once the babies go on formula feeds, they don't like to go for breastfeeding
go
at
back
all.
to breastfeed, because I'm a mother myself, and I know that the baby has to exert, to breastfeed. They have to work a little bit. And once they are used to the formula, they become lazy and they don't want to don't want to breastfeed. So you really should have, breastfeed them from the very beginning.
Yes, exactly. Actually, what we advise is within half an hour after a vaginal delivery, or even if it is a cesarean section, we make our nurses to try and breastfeed the babies. We do all that. But in spite of all that, once we shift the mothers to the rooms or the wards, then they don't want to do it. Because, every time they want the nurse to come and encourage them to breastfeed. And we don't have so many nurses, where we can have one nurse for each patient who has delivered just then. So that becomes a very difficult problem for us.
So it should really be a very organic process, very soon after delivery, and very organic bonding between the mother and the child.
Exactly.
Now, doctor, you said something about grandmothers who used to earlier, support and, actually teach, young mothers to be what they should do, what issues could arise. Now, for instance, sometimes, while breastfeeding should be an organic process, sometimes a mother might have trouble breastfeeding. For instance, the baby doesn't latch on properly to the breast. There can be issues. For instance, if a mother is not able to breastfeed, how would you coach or advise or support, a mother in that way? Because, there tends to be such a lot of stigma attached to the fact if you cannot breastfeed your child. So what would you say to that?
Sometimes, these women will have flat nipples, or sometimes what we call as a retractor nipples also, and we have techniques where we can pull the nipple out also. And sometimes we tell them, when we can't do that, they can use a nipple sheet, which is by vacuum, it gets attached to the breast, and they can breastfeed through that also. We do all that, and unless, the baby starts latching on, then a hormone oxytocin gets released from the brain, that makes the milk to be ejected. And that is very, very important. And many don't understand. And like you said, the babies are lazy. Humans are lazy by nature. Anyway, so if they find a better way or a easier way to drink their milk by a formula.
And they can also blackmail the mother. They can cry, I don't want this, I want the other thing.
Yeah, they keep crying and not latching on, and that is very important. And another thing is, these women should sit up and breastfeed the babies. When they lie down and breastfeed, what happens is, the baby's nose and everything gets crushed against the breast. That becomes another problem. So we tell them, even in the nights, you have to get up, sit and breastfeed. And then they say, we are very tired, we can't do that. And then the mothers who are attending, they'll say, my daughter is very tired, she has no sleep in the night, how can she do that? So let us start formula. So this becomes a big issue, and it is a tussle between us and the pediatricians, because the pediatricians find an easier way of advising formula feed, because the baby is losing weight, and we obstetricians, we want the mothers to breastfeed only. So this becomes an issue again.
Very important points that you have raised, doctor, and I'm sure any new mother who is listening to this interview will find this immensely useful. Breastfeeding is the best thing that you can do to your baby, and we all know, we who have become mothers, how difficult those first few months and even the first couple of years are, when you have to stay up nights. At the same time, for the sake of your baby, do make that effort, sit up so that the baby is in the best breastfeeding position. Now, another thing I want to ask you, because many of us are mothers, but at the same time, we are working women also, and many women go back to work quite early now after delivering their babies. So, many of us, we express our milk. Now, in the West, this is a very wide procedure, but in India, there still tends to be a lot of reservation and stigma attached to expressed breast milk. Now, I'm sure you've encountered this a lot. So this reservation especially, I'm sure, comes from the older generations. So what would you tell older women, mothers, grandmothers, if you face this kind of reservation, and is this milk at par with the breast milk when the mother is actually feeding?
Yeah, it is as good as the breast milk, because it is after all breast milk only. And see, even when we donate milk to the breast milk banks, we do the same thing. There, what they do is they mix up the milk, and then they pasteurize, and then they store it. But we can't do it. So what we have to do is collect it in the sterile vessels or bottles, doesn't matter, and then keep them at 4 degrees Celsius, not in the deep freeze. You should not freeze it. So once you bring it out, another thing which the mothers should know, and the grandmothers, whoever is the attending caregiver to the baby, they should not heat this milk.
Okay.
Yeah, they should not heat this milk. Just leave it at room temperature. It comes to the room temperature, and then you can feed the baby. And in the early stages, we always say don't ever use a feeding bottle, because once you use a feeding bottle, it becomes a problem. So instead, we use what we call as paladai. It is a sort of a small vessel, with a tip, which it can go into the mouth. In the South India, everybody uses it. We call it paladai. So that can be used, and it is very good. Children drink milk very nicely through that. So that, when the mother comes back from work, they can again latch onto the breast.
So it's the same kind of process for the baby, the express milk needn't alienate the baby. It's the same kind of process.
Exactly. So like you said, another thing I would advise is, if they are working for some firms or in some multinational companies, they can have creches where the mother can go in between, at least once in 2 hours or so, and then breastfeed and come back also. But unfortunately, we don't have so many firms having these creches, where the mothers can go and breastfeed and come back. And if you have seen, the New Zealand Prime Minister, the previous one, even she brought the baby to the parliament and breastfed the baby.
Yes, precisely, yes.
Yeah.
So that's the question I was about to ask you next, and you answered it yourself, that, the theme for this year's Breastfeeding Week is to enable working parents and mothers more. And as you said, we should have more creches, more baby-friendly areas, so that mothers can take their babies to work at least some days a week. We should enable that culture more in our country. Doctor, my last question to you is, for new mothers, and we all like to stay in shape, and we are always thinking about weight and losing weight and weight issues. Now, there tend to be a lot of myths around breastfeeding and weight gain, weight loss. What's the truth?
The truth is, if they breastfeed, they will lose weight. That is the truth. So when they breastfeed, it is an effort. They are losing calories because they are producing
milk.
You're
eating more, aren't you? When you're breastfeeding, you're also getting hungry.
Yes, hungry also. And then, you're losing water, you drink more water. And then, breastfeeding itself is an exercise also. And what many people don't understand is this oxytocin which gets released. It's also called as a love hormone, and it increases the bonding between the mother and the child, because you're hugging the baby and the baby is very happy to be hugged. And then the temperature also, it keeps the baby warm, and warmth is very essential for all of us. See, when you are in distress, if somebody hugs you, you feel very happy. The same way, the baby is hungry, the baby is in distress, you are hugging the baby. That is how, for premature babies, we came into kangaroo care, where the babies are tied to the mother's womb. So that way, this is going to be a helpful thing. And just because you are exercising doesn't mean you cannot breastfeed. You have to exercise. You can do yoga, you can do any exercise. Find the time. And there is always, when the baby is sleeping, in the early months, the baby sleeps almost for 18 hours. So you have enough time to do all these things also. What you have to do is manage the time. That's it. Time management is very, very important for the new mothers. And for them, the support is very important. And then I think, the father also, that is the husband of the parent of the child, the father of the child also should help them, so that, they share. Even in the nights, they help the wife to breastfeed.
Precisely.
So that support, moral support and physical support is very essential for new mothers. And then, once they share the responsibilities, I think all new mothers can breastfeed. No problem at all.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for your valuable time. I think we learned a lot talking to you. So new mothers should definitely breastfeed. Support from families is needed, support from the husband, and then you release all those wonderful love hormones, the oxytocin.
Exactly.
And the mother-baby bonding is like no other bonding in the world. So thank you very much, Doctor. Glad to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.